Hey guys, welcome to my training video on how to win against e4, e5. I'm Grandmaster Max Illingworth, and in this video, I will share with you a summary of the games I've played on chess.com using the system that I actually recommend in my course, Crush Sub 1800s with 1e4. In that course, I recommend the Scotch Gambit with d4, ed4, and bishop c4. And if you would like to enjoy a free chapter, free sample of that course, just check out the link in the description below, where I show you the lines I recommend against bishop to c5, which is one of the most common moves for black. I faced it nearly as often, maybe even more often actually, in my own games as the move knight to f6. But let's see the move knight f6 as well, because it's also an important move where I normally played e5. And most of the time, my opponents play d5 in this position because if you play knight g4 castles, then you can't really take on e5 because then you're going to lose a piece on the e file. By the way, the points I mentioned in this video to explain in more detail in the aforementioned Crush Sub 1800s with e4 course as well. But this is going to give a summary of my different playing experience, where I also faced knight e4 and queen e7 in one game each and won both of them. But yeah, most of the time I face the move d5 and after bishop e5 normally to move knight e4. Actually, I had quite a memorable game against a Grandmaster where my opponent played knight d7, castles, and then bishop e7. This is something I faced in a few of my games where I normally just take, and then go knight takes d4. And the idea of this is that if they play knight takes e5, which is what my Grandmaster opponent Vili Bernatsky played, well, then you have this nice move, bishop f4. We're able to attack the knight that's defending the pawn. And after c5, bishop e5, cd4, takes, and rook g8. This position is actually the one from my game that I also set actually as a puzzle for like one of the quizzes in my course. So I'm not going to give away the answer here, it's especially for the students of the course that were. But you're definitely welcome to put in the comments below what would be the move that you would play in this position after black's rook to g8. Okay, so instead of this, my opponents more often played the move knight e4. And now after knight takes d4, bishop d7, bishop c6. A common mistake that I faced in quite a few games was bishop takes c6 here. But in that case, it's quite nice just to take, and we'll end up getting a similar position to the main line, but where black doesn't even have the bishop pair to compensate for the doubled pawns. So really, it's better for black to play b takes c6, castles. And in my course, I mainly focused on the move bishop to c5 because it's a move that you'll see most often. And, well, in this case, there are a few different move orders, but most often I would normally just kick their knight away and then follow with bishop to e3. And most of my opponents actually, well, both of my opponents would play the move bishop b6, which is actually quite a nice idea, trying to push in the center with c5 and d4. In this case, I recommend going f4, knight e4, and now knight to d2, where we're just going to trade off black's strong knight on e4 and be left with quite a strong pawn center. And at this point, I had a game where my opponent played queen e7, and after knight b3, I was able to clamp down that weak square on c5, not letting black get an easy c5, and I went on to win pretty convincingly against a 2000 rated player from here. And really, in the other game I had where my opponent played c5, this was definitely, a better continuation. Black is able to push in the center and is somewhat close to equality. But we also can play moves like b3 here and just kind of shut down the black pawns on the light squares. We have our own ideas of expanding on the king side as well. So definitely it's a position where both sides have their chances. Of course, it's well known that out of the opening, if black plays perfectly, then no matter what white plays, they will not get an advantage out of the opening. So we have to accept that, if the opponent plays good moves, it's just a game of chess. I also sometimes face the move bishop e7, and the approach I generally like to play in this case was to either go f4 and just try to push the pawns quickly in the center. I've also had a couple of games where I went bishop to e6 as well, whereas after castles I would play f4, and play in a kind of similar way to what we saw before, where if knight e4 I can trade off the knight, or if they don't play knight e4 I can go f5 and start pushing my pawns toward their king for a nice kingside attack. And my score in these lines as well is like very close to 100%. Granted, it's because I almost always played it against much, much lower rated players. On the other hand, it also gives you a pretty good guide of what your opponents, say, rated below 1800 and even a bit above 1800 are most likely to play against you if you do play the Scotch Gambit, which I do find to be, of all the differences against e4, e5, the Scotch Gambit is the best scoring one for white. That's also, a fundamentally sound opening. So if they go d6, you just take on d4 and you basically get a much improved version of the Scotch game where their bishop can't get out. One move I faced in quite a few of my games that I don't cover in my course is knight e5. But after bishop b3, the plans are pretty straightforward. I mean, you're just going to kick away their knight. You don't have to do it right away. Normally, I'd go knight c3 and develop a couple of pieces first, and then play a move like f4 to kick the knight. But certainly a position like this is just incredibly pleasant for white. You've got more space. Black's just wasted time moving the knight. In this position, I played bishop e3 and knight f3 in a couple of games. Maybe if I had this position a third time, I might even consider... well, there's actually a lot of good moves white, but I might even consider a move like knight c6, doubling the pawns. Or a move like h3, so I can go bishop e3 without having to worry about knight g4. So I think if you get stuff like bishop e3, queen f3, rook e1, you can often think about an e5 break to take the initiative in the center. So that's quite a nice little plan for white there. I also faced h6 in some games, and honestly, it's not really a move you have to worry about too much. You're basically going to play like the same way as usual, but where, well, basically, castle's way more useful in h6 if we compare the 4 knight f6 lines we looked at before. And yeah, I mean, there are other rare moves I faced, but nothing too much to worry about. Like if bishop b4, for example, I would just go c3 and just play this very romantic double pawn stack with castles, where if they take the pawn, you get this very nice play down the long diagonals with the bishops. Kind of in a way an improved Danish gambit, where black played bishop b4 perhaps a little bit too early. And I won all 3 of my games from this position, so you know. But also there is a question, what happens if black doesn't play knight c6? What if they play the Petrov? And I find that against the Petrov, d4 is just a really effective weapon. It's a move I actually have played nearly as often as the main move of knight e5 in the database. And the reason I play it so often is that very few of my opponents played the move knight takes e4, which is basically the only good move for black here. What nearly all my opponents did instead is I would go ed4 and just let me take over the center with e5 very nicely. Say if knight e4, I had quite a lot of games with queen takes d4, d5, taking on passant, and just getting this very pleasant advantage up to knight c3, knight c6. Queen f4, where, I mean, you can definitely, castle either kingside or queenside, depending on your taste. I had a game against a 1800-ish rated player where I went like bishop e3, played long castles, and yeah, just got a very nice attacking setup where my opponent, tried to castle long, but I kind of went bishop b5 to anticipate it, and, with moves like knight e5, I can, just, basically destroy black by doubling his pawns around his king. It's a nice idea to keep in mind. Also, if they do play something else, say if they play knight d5, this is a move I faced quite a bit, but again, yeah, you're just going to kick their knight away with some bishop to c4 or such, and yeah, it's just a really, really bad position when you have the dominant center on e5. So you can see it only takes a couple of slightly imprecise moves for this to go really very wrong for black. Also, kind of funny point, I had some players who would pre-move knight c6, expecting me to, have played the Stafford gambit, but of course d5 and bishop c4, yeah, you're threatening queen d5, and this is just really horrible for black. And against the Philidor, yeah, I just would go d4, and I had a lot of games actually where my opponents played d4. This is what I faced most often by quite some margin. My opponents, most often played knight c6, but it just sort of transposed back into the Scotch gambit territory from before. While against knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, I had some pretty good results playing bishop f4 with a pretty straightforward plan of just going for long castles, f3, g4, g5. Admittedly, the move d5 is a little bit of a tricky move that I did lose to in one game, I think against a fellow Grandmaster. But yeah, in my course, I did sort of show how to deal with this in a sort of side note as such. Because you're not going to face d5 very much, but it's sort of the one move where they can, try to disrupt your usual plan of long castles, pawn storm, and mate their black king. Also, as I mentioned, of course, the move you'll face quite a lot at lower levels is c5, and you best just end up winning the pawn for free with 98 and long castles. So just make sure it's one of many traps that your opponents can easily fall into in these lines. And I mean, there are a lot of other moves they can play. Like, I don't think it makes sense to cover every single one, but for example, in the Latvian Gambit, I find his knight takes e5 is really strong. Normally, in order to avoid queen h5 problems, my opponents normally go queen f6, but yeah, after d4, d6. That's stuff I kind of learned in 2005, 2006, and kind of been playing ever since is just go knight c4, knight c3, and then the key move here basically is to play f3, which I have done in a couple of games. The idea being after takes, takes. But they can't actually play queen takes c2 because of bishop d3, and the queen's actually going to be trapped. In 2 games, my opponents played knight f6, but yeah, I just developed and basically won very, very easily from this point, using my nice lead in development in central space. So there you have it. That's basically showing you, as a general summary, how I've managed to basically get a very high score and win very easily against players below 1800 by playing the Scotch Gambit with knight f3, followed by d4 and bishop c4. There are even a few other move orders you can also use to reach a Scotch Gambit if you want to, which I do mention in the course incidentally. In any case, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said, if you want to enjoy the free sample of Crush Sub 1800 with e4, where I show you how to deal with bishop to c5, then definitely check that out in the link in the description. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.